A very recent report from the OECD, which is the club of the 34 richest countries in the world, has shown that food inflation is now falling rapidly right across the richest countries on our globe. In the UK, it's 5% and going down fast. In other countries, it's even lower. What's more, other prices, like oil and gas and the price of raw materials like iron and steel, are now back at the levels they were before the war in Ukraine and before COVID hit us. In other words, inflation is going away. Doesn't mean that prices have fallen back, but inflation is declining to the levels that we were used to for a decade before COVID hit. Now, that means that, as I predicted, inflation has sorted itself out. Inflation happened because we reopened too fast after COVID, and because markets reacted quite unreasonably after the Ukraine war broke out. Do you remember the toilet roll crisis of March 2020? Well, markets panicked in the same way with regard to food prices after war broke out in Ukraine. They bought, pushed up the prices, created ridiculous shortages that weren't necessary, and now all of that has sorted itself out and prices have returned to normal. We aren't going to see inflation again for a while. But there's a problem that remains. The Bank of England put up interest rates to supposedly tackle rising inflation. Did it solve anything? No, precisely nothing. Why? Because it takes at least 2 years for those interest rates to have any impact at all by the time they've worked through the marketplace. And the International Monetary Fund, another club of countries around the world, has said at the same time as the OECD has reported that actually interest rates have very little effect on inflation in countries where larger numbers of people have fixed rate mortgages, which is exactly what the UK's got. So in other words, the Bank of England's increase in interest rates did nothing to solve inflation, but it did do two things. One, it created a sense of panic when that was quite unnecessary. And two, it made the richest in the UK richer, as a result of which they have actually spent more and pushed up prices and fueled inflation when they shouldn't have done and wouldn't have done if the Bank of England hadn't increased those rates. In other words, everything the Bank of England did in response to inflation made the situation worse when, as I and some other economists predicted, inflation was always going to sort itself out anyway. Because over 500 years throughout history, that's exactly what it's always done. So, who's the villain of the piece when it comes to inflation? The Bank of England is. What should they be doing now? Cutting interest rates significantly. Are they going to do so? No. So, what are we going to end up with? The risk of continuing recession and austerity, and all because the Bank of England is making the rich richer at the cost to everyone else, to society.